I can't. Okay, number two, the runner-up, greatest films of all time, Citizen Kane, 1941, directed by Orson Welles, starring Orson Welles, Joseph Cotten. I think his third time appearing on this list, Joseph Cotten. He had the privilege in his career to work with some very talented directors. Dorothy Comingore, Ruth Warwick, and Agnes Moorehead. Um, Pretty much everyone in this cast is Mercury Theater players, either in the stage productions or radio plays, or both. Usually did both. So, the film that has the reputation of being the greatest film of all time, and held up that way for a while, number two on this list. Uh, let's get into the Orson Welles of it all. So, Orson Welles was kind of brought up and told that he was a child prodigy. He wasn't necessarily a child prodigy. He was kind of told that he was going to be a child prodigy. He had to be a child prodigy. Um, his mother was, I believe, a pianist. His father was an inventor, or was had a fortune off of an invention that he had come up with. Um, and yeah, so early on, Wells played violin and piano. He was going to be a musical prodigy. I think a couple days after his ninth birthday, his mother passed away from complications of hepatitis. And then he got passed around from father figure to father figure. In school, he found theater, and that was just another way of pleasing his father figures. Uh, Produced and starred in theater productions, and then co-founds Mercury Theater, and was known for being very innovative. So even in the theater and radio productions, Wells wasn't afraid to try new things, to push things. On theater with the staging, and sort of he would bring in contemporary themes into past works, Shakespearean works. They did Shakespeare plays. They adapted pretty much all the classic novels of the period. Um, Heart of Darkness, he did as a radio play, The Heart of Darkness. And then, of course, there's the War of the Worlds of it all. But yeah, so he had this reputation around him just coming into Hollywood, and Hollywood was paying attention, and they want to capitalize on that, of course. So everyone's falling over him. Studios are making pitches trying to get him to come direct a film. Um, and of course, eventually he signs with RKO. Signs with RKO because they are willing to give him complete creative control, which is what he had in stage and in radio. He'd often cast himself in the lead. Radio productions, he'd also often play multiple roles. Um, and he would finance his own successes. So he would make some money off of something, and he would immediately take that money and put it back into funding his next project, whatever it may be. Surround himself with the best to make the best. So RKO, he signs a 2-picture deal, budget of $500,000 per picture. Basically, the agreement is RKO has to agree on the project before it gets greenlit, and then after it's greenlit, they have no say in anything. So he gets complete creative control. They're not even supposed to be allowed to visit the set, view dailies, things like that. And he has final cut, which is something that Wells will wrestle with for the rest of his career. Studios interfering with his creative vision, especially in the editing process. So he signs with RKO, and initially he wants to adapt Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad's novel, which we've seen on this list, Apocalypse Now. He wanted to do it very experimentally. with sort of POV camera angles. Uh, did a lot of research on the culture, put a lot of money into it. He came up with sort of camera rigs, wanted to do extended sequences, stitch together the shots for long cuts or long shots. And he wanted to play Marlowe and Kurtz, and Marlowe would be POV. So the audience would see what Marlowe sees. Yeah, so he was experimental, but he couldn't get it in under the budget required for RKO to say okay to it. We had to abandon that. So eventually, brainstorming, Herman J. Mankiewicz, Mank, had been writing for Mercury's radio productions. So he's brainstorming with Mank. The two of them come up with the genesis of the idea for Citizen Kane. They go over the plot outlines, and then the two of them go their separate ways. I think Welles stays in New York. Mank is in LA. They separately write their drafts of the screenplay. Mank had signed a deal saying that he was getting paid pretty much as a script doctor. So it was a one-time fee, and he would not get screen credit. And then Welles takes the two screenplays and he combines them, and he, as we've seen with directors on this list, uses whatever he wants. Mank thought that he was taking all of his credit for his screenplay, so tried to file a grievance, I believe, with the Writers Guild. That didn't really go anywhere, but he raised a stink. Eventually, RKO agreed to give him writing credit on it. And then, of course, there's been a big deal made about who really wrote the screenplay. Mank claims that it's mostly his. I will say, if you look at Orson Welles' childhood and his biography, a lot of elements of his own life are in Charles Foster Kane, as he did with In Touch of Evil. He finds a way to put himself into the character. So, not entirely Mank's screenplay, I'll give you that. And even if it was, I think the success and the reputation of Citizen Kane is not solely on that screenplay. My 2 cents. So, yeah, Welles, in preparation for making Heart of Darkness, studied film, watched a lot of films, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. He was a big fan of John Ford. I mentioned that John Ford was his favorite director on multiple occasions. He watched The Searchers pretty much every night during production of Citizen Kane. And then he was fortunate to surround himself, or smart enough, first-time director, to surround himself with experienced people and the best in the business. So Greg Toland reportedly comes to him, seeking him out, knowing that I've got a shot here to do something different. The first-time director, and sort of the ignorance of Welles. Welles didn't really know what couldn't be done. He just knew what he wanted to do. He took from all these films that he had been watching, and he kind of took the best bits, the ideas that he really liked. He kind of Tarantino remixed it and made his own genre, maybe. It's hard to view Citizen Kane, modernize, and not see how inventive and how different it was at the time. And then, of course, it gets held up to other contemporary films from the period 40s, 41, and be like, well, is it that better than this other film? But you're comparing it to the other greatest films of the time period. Compare it to your average film of 1940, 1941. So yeah, Toland comes in, cinematographer, that deep focus, the those shots from the low angle, all the stuff that gets talked about, that sequence in the cabin where we're pulling out from the outside into the cabin. Yeah, and then Toland had worked with, up before this, some of the greatest directors in film. He'd worked with Howard Hawks. He had worked with John Ford. He had worked with William Wyler. And then he brings in Robert Wise, by the way, director of West Side Story, on this list, mentioned in that video. He is the editor of this film. Bernard Herrmann wrote the score. Herrmann's scores are in a lot of these films. And he used radio techniques from radio mixing to mix the sound on this film. So it was innovative in almost every single aspect of film. That's why Citizen Kane gets held up as the greatest of all time. Is it perfect film? I don't think so. I think the opening sequence with the news of the world or whatever it is, March of Time style thing, maybe a little too long to get into the actual story with Welles and start getting to know the character. But it's great, right? That's why it's on the list. And then, of course, there's the real William Randolph Hearst of it all. Comes out. Hearst hears that it's about him. It's not flattering, and he tries to have it shut down. He tries to pressure RKO to burn it, not release it. Welles tries to get it shown to as many people as he can, get them to see how good it is so that they kind of back him and say no. George J. Schaefer, who was the head of RKO, had this whole time, he had Welles's back. So he stood up against William Randolph Hearst, who threatened RKO that they wouldn't publish reviews or anything, show times of any of RKO's films. So that could really damage paper, sway. That could really damage RKO at the time, but he stood up to them. Yeah, so maybe people were afraid to say how good it was when it came out, or maybe it was too innovative and people didn't recognize. But it's number 2 on this list because pretty much first BFI film list, 1952. It was number 2 on that list. Bicycle Thieves on this list was number 1. And then subsequently, every 10 years, they published the list. From 62 to 2012, it was, up until 2012, it was number 1 consistently on the list. 2012 critics list is displaced by Vertigo. So in the 2012 list, it was number 2 on the critics list, and it was number 2 in the director's list. It was in a tie with 2001 Space Odyssey, number 3 on this list. And number 1 that year on the director's list was Tokyo Story. Then last year, it was number 3 on the critics list and number 2 on the director's list, consistently in top 2, 3, 1. AFI's list, greatest films of all time in 98, it was number 1. In 2007, again, it was number 1. And then on Metacritic, according to critic reviews, with a score of 100, it is ranked on there as the 3rd greatest film of all time. So why is it number 2 on this list? Well, because of you. On IMDb, it is number 96. So that is the sole reason it's not number 1 on this list. Citizen Kane. Is it the greatest film of all time? It's not a perfect film. It's made by humans. Humans are infallible. But that's why humans can make art and not computers. Thank you for watching. Like,